Hey, you guys, gals, and bums, and welcome back to A Few Bad Men. All right, today I have my top 10 most influential mafia hits. Now, this is a mafia-only list. You have to be Italian or Sicilian and made in the mafia to be on this list. So that means guys like Bugsy Siegel or Dutch Schultz, they don't count. I'll do another video on those guys later. But there was a lot to choose from, and this may not be your list. You can leave your list in the comments, but this is my top 10 hits that reshaped the mafia. All right, so make sure you guys stay tuned to the end of the video. I'll be premiering my new YouTube series, Twist, based on the Murder Incorporated gang from Brooklyn. So make sure you guys stick around and you don't miss that. Before we get into the list, I have a few honorable mentions. All right, the Frankie Yale hit in 1928 in Brooklyn, and the Big Jim Colosimo hit in 1920 in Chicago. All right, let's get into the list. Number 10, Umberto Valente. Umberto Valente was born in 1891 in Sicily. By the early 1910s, he was a well-known gunman in Harlem with over 20 notches in his belt. He was in the family of Salvatore Toto Dquila, the second boss of bosses in the American Mafia. In 1922, he fell out of favor with the boss, and Dquila put a contract out on him. He later told Valente that he would lift the death sentence if Valente would rid him of another problem. A man who was gaining more and more influence and money through his bootlegging operation, Joe Maseria. After a few failed attempts on Joe's life, Joe reached out to Valente to settle the beef. On August 11, 1922, Valente and Joe met at John's of 12th, an Italian restaurant at 2nd and 12th Street. During the sit-down, the two agreed to stop trying to kill each other. They shook hands and Valente walked down onto 2nd Avenue. When he reached the corner of 13th, he noticed two men watching him. Then they pulled guns and shots rang out. The two men fired from the corner diagonal of Valente. He was hit but was able to run to a taxi. Valente pulled his gun, but his injuries prevented him from raising his arm. During the chaos, one of the men took aim and calmly fired 3 shots, one hitting Valente right below the heart. The two shooters then pointed their guns at the crowd and threatened to shoot them if they got in their way. After this hit, Joe went on to become Joe the Boss, and the two shooters were Charlie Lucky Luciano and Vito Genovese. This is the act that got them both made into Maseria's family. Number 9, Toto Dquila. Salvatore Toto Dquila was born in 1873 in Palermo, Sicily. He moved to the U.S. as an adult and settled in Harlem, where he joined the Morello gang, run by Giuseppe Morello. When Morello went away for counterfeiting in 1911, Toto eliminated the rest of the men competing for the job, and by 1912, he was entrenched as the boss of bosses, not only in New York, but he had spies in every Sicilian gang in America. By 1928, Toto's reign was being challenged by Joe the Boss Maseria. Joe had been building an army and had plans on the boss of bosses title. On October 10th, Joe made his move. Toto Dquila took his wife and family to Dr. D. Cassio at 211 Avenue A, Manhattan. Toto and his wife were both suffering from heart disease, and they were there for their daily treatments. While his wife and kids were in with the doctor, Toto was outside tinkering under the hood of his car. Witnesses say he was approached by 2 men. When he came from under the hood, harsh words were exchanged. Then one of the men pulled a gun and shots rang out. 5 slugs tore into Toto's body at close range. His wife and the doctor ran out and took him inside the doctor's office, but it was too late. Toto Dquila died at the age of 50. This hit solidified Joe the Boss as the most powerful mafioso in the country. Number 8, Jeppe the Clutch Morello. Giuseppe Morello was the first boss of bosses in America. Born in 1867 in Sicily, he moved to the U.S. with his family and eventually settled in Harlem. By the turn of the last century, he was without a doubt the most powerful mafioso in the U.S. After being sentenced to jail in 1911 for running a counterfeit money ring, he returned to New York in 1922 and became the right hand of Joe the Boss Maseria, his former underling. When the Castellano War broke out in 1930 between Joe the Boss and Salvatore Marzano, Morello was identified as the biggest threat, and Maranzano's men made him a priority. On August 15, 1930, Giuseppe Morello left his home in New Jersey and headed over to his office on the 2nd floor of a dingy brownstone at 352 East 116th Street. Morello was joined by Jaspar Periano, a longtime member of the Morello gang. Morello and Periano were going over the figures when Periano's uncle, Gaspar Valero, came by. He was headed on vacation to Italy and dropped by to say goodbye. Outside, a car pulled up and two men got out armed with .45 caliber pistols. They made their way up to the office and kicked the door in, and then shots rang out. Joseph Periano was shot twice and tried to escape out the second floor window and was found dead in a doorway in the courtyard. Gaspar Palaro was shot but managed to run out of the door and out to the street where he collapsed. He would survive. Morello ran into the inner office and the shooters pursued. The 63-year-old, now pudgy and out-of-shape gangster tried to dodge the bullets, but to no avail. He fell to the floor with several bullets in his neck and chest. This death weakened Joe the Boss. Charlie Lucky Luciano took Morello's place as underboss to Joe. Number 7, Carmine Galante. Carmine Lilo Galante was one of the most feared men in the mafia. Born in 1910 in Harlem, he was a problem from day one. His willingness to commit violence on command helped him rise quickly in the Bonanno family. Lilo helped to build an international heroin smuggling operation, and in 1962, he was convicted and sentenced to 20 years for narcotics. And when he returned, after serving half of that, he resumed his operation with the help of Sicilian-born gangsters known as Zips. Even though he was not the boss of his own family, he had plans of becoming the boss of bosses. Lilo refused to play nice with the rest of the New York Mafia bosses, and he kept his heroin pipeline to himself. He was becoming a problem, and the commission decided to deal with him. On July 12, 1979, Lilo, his nephew James Galante, and cousin Angelo Bruno arrived at Joe and Mary's Italian restaurant in Bushwick, Brooklyn, around noon. They went out back to the patio for lunch. At around 2:45, Lilo's cousin said that he wasn't feeling well, and he was seen pacing outside of the restaurant until a blue Ford Mercury pulled up. 5 men in ski masks with shotguns and handguns exited. 4 entered the restaurant while 1 stood guard. Joe's son was on the phone, and he saw them enter. He tried to run and warn the men on the patio, but was shot in the back. As Lilo lit a cigar, the men made their way to the patio, and shots rang out. A shotgun blast knocked Lilo down, and he was shot under the left eye with a handgun. Cesar Bonaventure, his bodyguard, joined in on the hit, shooting Lilo multiple times. The shooters then returned to the car, and the Mercury screeched up Knickerbocker Avenue, leaving Lilo dead with a cigar clenched between his teeth and his pinky ring in the air. Number 6, Angelo Bruno. Angelo Bruno was born in 1910 in Sicily, and his family moved to Philadelphia when he was a kid. Coming from a mafia family, he worked his way up through the ranks of the Philly mob with brains, not muscle. In 1959, he became the boss of the Philadelphia family. He was known as the Docile Don because of his fairness and his use of violence as a last resort. But Angelo was sitting on a gold mine. In the 1970s, when New Jersey legalized gambling in Atlantic City, Angelo was in position to make a lot of money. Other families in New York felt that they could make a lot more if he wasn't there. On the morning of March 21st, 1980, Angelo Bruno spent 2 hours in Trenton, New Jersey, in front of the New Jersey State Commission of Investigations. That evening, he had dinner at Cusa's Little Italy in the 900 block of South 11th Street with his lawyer Jacob Kosman and Raymond Long John Moderano, a member of Bruno's family. After dinner, his bodyguard John Stanford drove him home. As Stanford and Bruno pulled in front of 934 Snyder Avenue, Angelo asked him to roll the window down so he could smoke a cigarette. As Angelo lit up, a man came out of the shadows and approached the car from behind on Bruno's side. When he got within a few feet, the man raised the shotgun and shots rang out. One blast at close range blew a hole in the back of Bruno's head right behind the right ear, shattering his jaw and forcing his mouth open. And that is how he stayed for hours while the police investigated. The death of Bruno and the death of his underboss a year later from a bomb would spark a war that ended with little Nicky Scarfo becoming the boss of Philadelphia. Number 5, Joe Columbo. Joe Columbo was born in 1923 in New York. He too grew up in the mafia. His father was a member of the Profaci family, and Joe followed in his footsteps. By the late 1950s, early 60s, he was a captain. After Joe Profaci died in 1962, Joe Magliocco took over as the boss. Not long after, Joe Magliocco and Joe Bonanno planned to kill the other 3 bosses and take over the commission. Joe Columbo was given a contract by Magliocco to kill them. Instead of doing that, he went to the commission and told them about the plot. Bonanno and Magliocco were exiled, and Columbo was rewarded by being named the boss of the Profaci family. In June of 1970, Joe created the Italian Civil Rights League, an organization that stood up for the civil rights of Italian Americans and fought back against how Italians, and the mafia in particular, were portrayed in the media. The second Italian American Civil Rights League rally was to take place on June 29, 1971. Joe Columbo walked through the crowd surrounded by bodyguards and made his way to the stage. He stopped to let some photographers take his picture. One of them was 25-year-old Jerome Johnson of New Jersey. Joe said, "All right, that's enough pictures," and headed toward the stage. Before he got a few steps, shots rang out. A gunman fired several shots. One struck the mob boss square in the back of the head. He stumbled forward and tried to grab hold of a police barricade but fell forward onto the ground, wounded but not dead. Someone shouted, "They got Joe. A black guy did it." Then 2 more shots rang out. Jerome Johnson lay mortally wounded with 2 slugs in his back. Joe will remain in a vegetative state until he died in 1978. With Joe gone, Carmine the Snake Persico became the boss of the family that now bears Joe's name. Number 4, Albert Anastasia. Albert Anastasia was possibly the most dangerous man to ever become a boss in the mafia. Born in 1902 in Tropea, Italy, Albert came into the country illegally aboard a freight ship. He jumped ship and took a job as a longshoreman on the Brooklyn docks and instantly made his presence felt. Albert was extremely violent, and in 1921, he was convicted of murder and sentenced to death. He would get a retrial and be found not guilty and released. In the 30s, he became the underboss to Vincent Mangano and head of the Brooklyn gang of killers known as Murder Incorporated. Albert used violence as the first resort. He enjoyed hurting people and personally took part in murders despite his position. In 1951, he killed his own boss, Vincent Mangano, and took the throne and became boss of what would later be known as the Gambino family. But Albert was greedy, and that would be his downfall. And other gangsters decided it would be better if he was gone. At 10:18 a.m. on October 25, 1957, Albert and his nephew, Jimmy Squillante, walked into Grasso's barbershop on the first floor of the Park Sheraton Hotel. He greeted Bacino, his barber, and Grasso, the owner, ordered a shave and a haircut, removed his gray hat, blue top coat, and a jacket to his brown suit, and hung them up. He took a seat in chair 4, which gave him a view out of the window on the 55th Street and 7th Avenue. Bacino tucked a tissue wrap around his neck and began to clip the back of his head. 2 men wearing dark scarves over their faces entered the shop from the hotel lobby, walked around the partition that screened the shop's chairs from the lobby, and went straight to chair 4. In an instant, they were at Albert's back. One man went to the left of Albert and shoved Bacino out of the way with the muzzle of his gun. The other man positioned himself on his right. At the last moment, Albert opened his eyes and began to rise, but it was too late. Albert raised his left hand, and then shots rang out. 2 bullets tore into the hand of the Mad Hatter, so close they left powder burns. A third one hit him in the hip. He got out of his chair and stumbled towards chair 3. A 4th bullet crashed into the back of his head, and he fell dead between chairs 2 and 3. The shooters walked with haste out of the shop into the lobby and escaped. With Albert Anastasia gone, Carlo Gambino took over as the boss of the family that would bear his name. Number 3, Paul Castellano. In 1976, when Carlo Gambino died, the job of boss was given to Big Paul Castellano. Paul Castellano was born in 1926 in Brooklyn and grew up in a mafia family. His father and uncles were in the Mangano family in Brooklyn, and in the 1940s, Paul started his criminal career. Paul was seen as a businessman and not so much a gangster. His sister married their cousin, Carlo Gambino, and that made him the brother-in-law and cousin to one of the most powerful men in the mafia. In 1983, Gene Gotti, the brother of John Gotti, one of Paul's captains, was arrested for narcotics. Paul demanded the transcripts of the FBI tapes used to make the case, but Gotti refused. What was on those tapes would have gotten his brother and his best friend killed. Paul threatened to break up Gotti's crew or worse if he didn't turn him over. The man keeping Gotti safe was Angelo Della Croce, Paul's underboss. When Della Croce died on December 3rd, 1985, Gotti knew his time was up. So he decided to strike Paul before Paul could strike him. He teamed up with Sammy the Bull Gravano, another Gambino captain, and they planned to hit. On December 16th, 1985, Paul Castellano and Thomas Bellotti, his chauffeur and new family underboss, were on their way to a meeting with some of the family captains at Sparks Steakhouse. They pulled up in front of Sparks at around 5:26 p.m. As soon as Paul stepped from his car, 2 shooters in Russian hats and raincoats stepped from the shadows, and shots rang out. Paul was hit with a volley of shots in the head and chest and went down. Tommy Bellotti got out of the driver's side and was met with another gunman and was shot and killed. The death of Paul Castellano propelled John Gotti to the top spot and started the downfall of the Gambino family. Number 2, Joe the Boss Maseria. Joe Maseria was born in 1886 in Memphis, Italy. He too came to the States as a youth and quickly fell in with the criminal element, and he joined the crime family of Giuseppe Morello and Lupo the Wolf. When Prohibition hit, he became a major player, and his power threatened the boss of bosses at the time, Toto Dquila. In 1922, Dquila passed a death sentence on Joe, but he escaped. Joe began to build an army and had some of the toughest young hoods under him. Guys like Frank Costello, Vito Genovese, Al Capone, and Charlie Lucky Luciano. By 1928, Joe was boss of bosses in America. In 1930, a war broke out between the gang of Joe the Boss and the forces of Salvatore Marzano of Castellano del Golfo in Sicily. By 1931, it was clear that Joe was losing the war, and he sued for peace, and a ceasefire was agreed upon. On April 15, 1931, Joe left his house and drove to Coney Island to the Villa Nuevo Tomorrow, a restaurant owned by mafioso Gerardo Scarpato. He parked his bulletproof car in the garage down the street and walked a half a block to the restaurant. Joe entered Scarpato's, where he found 2 men waiting for him. The trio were joined by a fourth a few minutes later. The quartet ordered a lunch of fish, and Scarpato sent his mother-in-law to purchase the fish from the market. While they were waiting, one of the men pulled a deck of cards and they began to play a game of pinochle. At around 3:30 p.m., a dark blue sedan pulled up in front of the restaurant and 2 men got out. They walked into the restaurant and quickly went to the back where Joe and his party were. In the dining room, Joe was sitting with his back to them, and then shots rang out. The 2 men opened up on Joe with .38s, hitting him 5 times in the back of the head, neck, and back. The 2 shooters ran back to their car and drove off. The men who were with Joe also took off, dropping their guns in the alley behind the restaurant. This hit was pulled off by Joe's underboss, Charlie Lucky Luciano. With Joe gone, the war ended, and Charlie became the underboss to the new boss of bosses, Salvatore Marzano. Number 1, Salvatore Marzano. Salvatore Marzano was born in 1886, a few months after Joe. But unlike Joe, Marzano didn't come to the U.S. as a kid. He came as an adult in 1925, already a well-respected mafioso in his hometown of Castellano del Golfo in Sicily. In the U.S., Marzano quickly gained respect and money through bootlegging and smuggling illegal immigrants into the country. In 1929, Joe the Boss let it be known to all Italian gangsters in New York that they would have to pay him for the right to breathe. Marzano was in the family of Niccolo Schero, but Schero did not have the will or the balls to fight Joe, so he went back to Sicily and Marzano took over as the leader of the Castellano clan. After a year of fighting, it was clear who would be the victor. When Joe the Boss was killed, Marzano became the boss of bosses and his underboss was Charlie Lucky. But Marzano didn't trust Charlie, and he began to make plans to have him and his underboss, Vito Genovese, bumped off. But Charlie got wind of this, and he decided to strike first. On the afternoon of September 10, 1931, 3 to 5 men burst into Marzano's office and announced themselves as federal agents. The fake cops told everyone to line up on the wall, including Marzano, who had come out to see what was going on. They took Marzano back into his office. Then one of the men began to twist Marzano's arm behind his back, while the other one pulled a knife and stabbed him and slashed his throat. Marzano was able to break free of his killers, but before he could grab something to defend himself with, shots rang out. Marzano was hit several times and collapsed on the floor of his office. The death of Marzano marked the birth of the American Cosa Nostra. Charlie Lucky Luciano took over as the boss of bosses, but he refused the title, but he was that nonetheless. And that, my friends, is my top 10 most influential mafia hits of all time. Make sure you leave your hit list in the comments and we can get the debate going. All right. So for those of you who are not members or Patreons, you don't know what's going on with the Few Bad Men and what I got going on for the future. But I am ready to reveal that to you guys now. I've been working on a series made with AI based on the Murder Incorporated gang from the 1930s. It's called Twist. So this is the trailer for Twist, and I hope you guys enjoy it.
We just wanted to make it to the big leagues.
Relis, time to go.
We know it wasn't going to be easy, but we did what we had to do.
Hey, Maya.
Some guys were just begging to get clipped.
I'm gonna kill Happy, Capone, and anyone else who had anything to do with Joey's death.
Everybody's on edge because of Pretty. Let's go and see Mandy.
Yeah, it's right on the other side of the bridge.
We got numb to it. Taking a bum became like tying his shoes. We know what we were doing was wrong, but once you're in, you're in. Deep down, I think we all knew what was waiting for us in the end.
All right, so what do you guys think? Leave in the comments, let me know what you think. Any criticisms, I'm not scared of criticism, let me know what you think. So make sure you get yourself a membership or a Patreon because it's going to be dropping there first when it does. Okay? So if you're new here and you like what we do over here at A Few Bad Men, you want to join the gang, first thing you got to do is you got to bump off that subscribe button. Second thing you got to do is you got to break that thumb. And the third thing you got to do is ring that bell and set it for all notifications so you don't miss nothing. So you don't especially miss twists when I drop it. All right? So this has been A Few Bad Men. Keep your nose clean and don't take any wooden nickels. I see yous in the funnies.